All right, welcome everybody. Single file, come on in. I'm going to flash the rules real quick. All right. I'm going to flash the rules. Here we go. Here are the Zoom rules. While people are filing in, I'm going to keep this up on the screen so people understand. Cut your little break for now. Keep your line muted. Do not share video. Do not share your screen. One strike and you're out. Peace and love. Peace and love. Welcome everyone to the May 21. Today's May 21, right, David?
You are correct. Yes.
To the May 21,
all day.
The Employer Handbook Zoom chat. Welcome everyone. I'm going to leave this up on my screen for a little while. You can see our two lovely faces over, at least it's on to my right. I'll introduce myself and then I'm going to turn it over to my guest this week, my special guest. I'm Eric Meyer. You may know me from such blogs as theemployerhandbook.com. I'm the publisher there. I am also a labor and employment attorney at Fisher Broyles. And I am joined this week by someone that I have known for quite some time, many, many years. David Mohl is my special guest this week. David, tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me, Eric. So yes, my name's David Mohl. I am a partner with Jackson Lewis. I'm based in the Atlanta office, specialize my practice in disability leave and health management issues. Prior to joining Jackson Lewis about 2 years ago, I was Associate General Counsel responsible for the global labor and employment function for the Hershey Company. And prior to that, I was in-house with Cigna. So have a bit of a variety of perspectives from both the employer side of the fence and as well as private practice from a law firm perspective.
And that's why we have you today. David, if you're thinking this guy, he looks familiar, a little longer hair, but he seems familiar. David, he's always keynoting the DMEC conferences. He's publishing like crazy on LinkedIn information. So if you haven't connected yet with David on LinkedIn, please do so. Search him out, David Mohl. But yeah, David is a wonderful resource. We had Jeff Novak last week, who's a great disability and leave management employment attorney, and David's right up there too with Jeff. And we're not going to focus too much on FMLA ADA today. I think we're a little tired from that. We spent the whole week on it, the whole session on it last week. But today we're going to focus on some other things and really tap into David's experience, both as outside counsel now at Jackson Lewis, but also as in-house counsel when he was with. Who's violating the rules? I warn you, keep your line muted. If I see you, I'm going to kick you out. Line muted, people. Thank you. All right. Let's do the disclaimer real quickly, and then I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Folks, I say this every week, and I'm just going to put it up on the screen. David and I are lawyers. We may say it depends from time to time, which could confuse you because your lawyers do that as well, but don't get it twisted. We are not your lawyers, or we are not your lawyers, excuse me. We don't provide legal advice here. We don't create attorney-client privilege here. And we assume that all of your questions are hypothetical and for a friend. If you want legal advice, be smart. Don't get it from a free Zoom chat. Go pay for it. All right? Good. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I trust everyone knows the rules. You know, the rules. Keep your line muted. Don't share your screen. Don't start video. All right, let's get into the substance. Who is that? Whose face is that? I'm going to kick them out. Hold on one second. There we go. You're gone. Good. All right. David, Let's talk first about employee health screening, which seems to be a big thing these days when we're talking about return to work. So you're down in Atlanta. Georgia is open for business. Folks are returning to work. I see you haven't gotten that haircut yet, but that's okay.
No.
Example.
Stage is my friend. Stage 1 is just going back to work. Stage 2 is maybe getting a haircut.
Got you. So
before they kick me out of work because I don't have one.
That's why I work from home and wear a starter hoodie. You at least have a collared shirt. Sorry about that.
I was due. It'd been a little while.
There you go. What legal obligations, or what are some of the legal obligations that an employer may have to screen employees? You know, whether it's a temperature check, a COVID-19 test, something like that, as they are returning to work.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a couple things, and we've seen. I mean, the COVID, as we all know, has moved so fast, and I mean, it's new. Or things. If you just look at just the CDC guidance, there's some of their guidance is updated daily, different parts of that guidance. So as this has evolved, you know, we've seen a couple things. Is you know, really from the practical approach, and it's important to understand within the guardrails of what you can do and what you can't do. But the number one thing, obviously, is keeping your workplace safe. And with that, you know, what screening should be, it should be aligned to what the CDC guidance is for COVID symptoms. I mean, the CDC's guidance, that's like the epicenter of all this. That's where you start. But keep an eye on it because it changes. But in terms of temperature checks, really what this comes down to is it's just a straight direct threat issue under the ADA, which the EEOC has said, while COVID is a pandemic, it clearly presents a direct threat in the workplace. And as such, employers can screen employees for symptoms before permitting them to come to work, which includes a temperature check. You know, so there's a couple things, though, is if you're going to do a temperature check, make sure that the people know what they're doing, right? Like, you hear all things about face screening and these things. I mean, you have kids. I have kids. You know that thermometer, one of these things?
Oh, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I just tell them to take their own temperature.
I mean, I do that 5 times and I get 5 different readings, right? Some of them are sub 30. So I know, I mean, those things can have a lot of variance. So make sure you understand the equipment as well.
Yeah, and I joke about this, and I probably shouldn't, but it's not like Sam or Samantha from HR is lining up to be the one. Oh yeah, I want to be the one who gets to take everyone's temperature today down the
right.
PC, right? So I mean, one thing that employers should be considering if they're going to do temperature checks is, do you want to have employees do this at home, right, on the daily, or a couple times per week, maybe along with some other certification that they can submit electronically, either via an app, intranet, text message, email, something that basically, certifies that these folks are good to go and come into the office. I'm not a huge proponent of daily temperature checks. I just, if people are going to be able to get around it, right? I can take some Tylenol in the morning that'll probably get me under 100.4. So I think temperature checks, I mean, they're a prophylactic measure, but I think they may be overkill if done just to everyone. Then you start to have these issues of like, well, is this compensable time under the Fair Labor Standards Act for non-exempt employees? Remember folks, no legal advice here. I take the position that it's not. And I look back at some Supreme Court guidance and some old DOL letters, DOL opinion letters, suggesting that it's not a compensable time, but that's under federal law, and your mileage may vary. Maybe maybe it is compensable under state law. It might be compensable under the FLSA. I don't know for sure. I think, but it is what it is. I think some of the better steps, and I'd love to hear you talk more about this, David, is just from a business standpoint. I don't think we can overstate how important it is to preach safety and how the business is taking safety so seriously. It is the top priority, whether it's through communications, meetings, actual tangible steps with all the hand sanitizer and masks and other PPE and social distancing and return to work plans. But from a business standpoint, how important is it to emphasize safety as we return to work?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really important. I mean, this has been an evolution. So, I'm also on the Jackson Lewis's, like the core COVID response team. So we've seen a pretty big evolution with this. I mean, it started with, someone just had traveled from China, and then it went to someone's infected in the workplace. And now we're seeing a lot of return to work. So it's a couple things. Number one, at the core of all that is safety, because remember, one thing we talk about symptoms and temperature, just because you have 100.4 degree fever or that you don't, doesn't mean you have COVID. I mean, that's one symptom. So the key is, and there's no, I mean, look, if someone out there has the 100% cure to prevent this thing, then, I want in, right? I mean, that's what we're all looking for. But the key thing is the core of this is safety. It's social distancing, cleaning and disinfecting the workplace. Because aside from the law, it gives people peace of mind. And where we're seeing now as places, especially Georgia, where my office is really opening up big time, is you have those fears of going back to work. And at the core of that is, look, we take safety very seriously, and we're being transparent. These are things we're doing, masks, gloves, social distancing, if you're, barriers if appropriate. But that's what it comes down to. I mean, the workplace as we know it is this is a whole different ball game, and we're seeing the way people work differently. But safety, you're right. I mean, that's at the heart of this whole thing. And there's enough fear out there that people just want to feel safe, and there's risk. They feel risk when they leave their house. So it's important, as you note, that an employer needs to be out there not only doing things, and that's why there's a lot of guidance from the CDC and other organizations on reopening, but that letting employees know the steps that are being taken to be safe, because also for that to be effective, you need the employees to be all in and buy in. Because as you noted before, if you want to work, whether we're talking about the FFCRA or anything under this whole COVID umbrella that we're talking about, this is more prone than anything to employees that work the system. They're painting with a broad brush to try and protect people in an imperfect information dynamic. So employees they're the stakeholders. They're the people that really need to buy in and be effective. And also there's that peer pressure component. I mean, personally, I remember, my gosh, 2 months ago, the first time I went out and had to run out somewhere, and I was like, I had a mask with me, and I felt really kind of odd doing it. Now it's like nothing. Like, I mean, you'd walk right out and people wouldn't think twice about it. So there's that acceptance and that buy-in from employees. They need to know the commitment from the employer, but also how they play into that. And I think with the mask coming on, here we go.
My kids do not want my mask coming on. Check this out.
That's you, man.
They've already gotten, I can't wait to wear that to court. My crusty clown mask.
You might get some publicity on that.
I might. I haven't had yet. I haven't had to wear it in public, but then again, I'm a bit of a recluse. I haven't been out of the house. I haven't been off my property in like weeks, months. So that's me being me. You do you. I echo everything that you're saying. I don't think there is too much safety that you can preach. I mean, you look at some of the lightning rods, Costco, for example. I certainly don't want to pick on them, but they've gotten a reputation for being a pretty safe place to shop, or seemingly. They enforce the mask rule, and word gets around. And yeah, it is a very polarizing issue. You get some people who show up there who don't have the mask on, and I think they're looking for attention, and it is what it is. And they get kicked out, and a video goes viral. But that, I think, in the long run, that helps Costco. That builds them some good PR with most people. And if you can bring that into your workplace and practice, preach, and reemphasize safety, I think you're going to have a lot easier time bringing folks back to work. But there are other issues attendant to bringing folks back to work. And, we've talked a little bit about this in prior conversations, and, we'll rehash it a bit here. And really, what are some of the best practices that you're seeing, especially not just advising clients, but being in Georgia? What are some of the best practices you've observed in terms of employers bringing employees back to work, other than preaching safety? We've got that.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, it obviously depends on what the nature of your business is, right? I mean, I think let's kind of speak more agnostically, just generally a little bit. I mean, things that I'm seeing is, it's kind of the old crawl, walk, run, even though, like, especially some people in the service industry. I mean, I have clients and friends that own restaurants here, and they're like, look, we could open, but I'm not ready for that. We're going to do takeout. But what I'm seeing more generally are, things like making sure that cleaning and disinfecting and communicating the safety things that we talked about at the outset, but also doing things like staggering when people come back. So, okay, we have groups, and actually we have schools here that are preemptively thinking about this as a possible contingency plan in the fall, as our last day of school here in my district is tomorrow. But they, it's similar in the workplace. Like, okay, this group of people are going to be working from the office Monday and Wednesday and working remotely Tuesday and Thursday. And then so that kind of eases people back in. It limits the number of people from a social distancing challenging perspective, and also gives people more peace of mind. But we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing wearing masks. We're seeing, when you do leave your property, one thing that I'll predict you'll see, what we see here is, and I don't go out a lot. This is my first day in the office in probably 2.5 months, because I just needed to, like, scenery change, right?
No judgment, no judgment.
Right. But, I have, I'll go out very early on a Saturday morning and go to the grocery store, and you'll see duct tape down, like 6 feet apart, going down one aisle, coming back. I mean, same kind of thing in the workplace, is control the flow. People go in one, exit out the other, that kind of stuff. So, and it's also, it's a balance, right? Like, sometimes I'm seeing people say, look, let's stress certain things in our safety component to make employees feel better, but can be an overreach and backfire if you say, hey, look, COVID is highly contagious, and these are the rates, and this is what happens, and if you're this, that, and it creates a scare tactic, like, oh my. And the other thing I've seen, which I'm not a big fan of in terms of legally effectiveness, is I'm hearing more of, hey, can I have my employees sign a full release and a waiver?
Oh God.
And it's like,
get
look,
me started.
In Georgia, for example, can't waive a workers' comp claim. And if you're talking about gross negligence, that's not going to get you anywhere. But from a practical perspective, there's this generalized fear that a lot of people have returning to work. You put that in front of somebody, you run the risk of saying, well, what do they know that I don't? Like, they obviously think I'm going to get COVID. I'm not going back to work. So, yeah, we're starting to see more of those requests. It's just education. What
about in Georgia? Am I correct that there's still a stay-at-home order for folks that are 65 and older?
So people that are deemed, what I'll use the term loosely, I'll use the CDC term, because the Georgia order uses a little bit of different terminology, but it's just nomenclature. People that are identified in CDC guidance that are susceptible, what we'll call higher risk. People are 65, asthma, compromised immune system. There's a shelter in place order, but there's exceptions to that, and including going to work, especially if you're an essential business. Now that order, unless it's extended, ends on June 12th. But you raised another good point, and a thought is, the other thing that employers need to be careful of, that I'm hearing a lot of, is making assumptions and having an overreach. Like, hey, can I tell all my people that are 65 or older to stay home? Or can I say, identify if you have, heart disease, if you've got a compromised immunity system. You can't do that under the ADA. But people, so you're right, when we talked about before, safety's key, but you have to know the guardrails.
Yeah. Hey, I lobbed you that softball and you knocked it right out of the park. I'll add, I'll add under the ADEA, right? So if you have folks that are older and you're concerned about, are they more at risk from contracting COVID if I bring them back, you can offer them an accommodation, right? You can offer them an alternative. They don't have to accept it. And so if they accept it, okay, right? Great. If they don't accept it, then bring them back to work unless, there's some federal or state order that says you can't. Because then you start to get into those situations. It's akin to a pregnant employee who you learn they're pregnant, they're working in a blue collar, tougher job where they have to lift stuff, move stuff. Maybe they work around chemicals, and you pull that woman aside and you say, hey, Joan, we're so concerned about you and the unborn fetus that we don't want you working between now and when you deliver. That's pregnancy discrimination. That is some of the lowest hanging fruit that the EEOC can pluck. So stereotyping around now is no good. I'm seeing some questions popping up, and I want to encourage people to ask these hypothetical questions for a friend using the chat feature. So if you have questions, just throw them up in the chat. I'm seeing a couple right now. One asks, so can we approach a high-risk employee? Yeah, you can approach a high-risk employee and have a discussion. It's probably going to evolve into, might be an ADA interactive dialogue, but certainly you can have that discussion. Someone asked, where can I find the recording of Zoom last week? You guys want to see Novak again? It's on the Employer Handbook YouTube channel.
Ouch. I'm not going to take that personally. I love Jeff Noah. I mean, he's great. But ouch, right? You're seeing me and you're thinking, gosh, where's that Jeff Noah? I'll tell you another thing, Aaron, just along those lines, when you ask those questions, and you and I presented a million times together. I was supposed to see you in Philadelphia this month, in fact, which, but for our presentation. But, as we always talk about when we do, these presentations, and, the most important or powerful, kind of phrase under the ADA, and it applies to these other categories, is how can we help you? Because you don't want to start getting into the world of a regarded as claim.
Yeah. I agree with you. I'm slightly distracted for a second because I'm trying to find real quickly the YouTube channel link. I'm just going to throw it up in the chat box. Bear with me 1 second. Here we go.
But also, I'll say this while you're looking for that. I'll make a couple other key points. Is one thing that we're doing here at Jackson Lewis is we have a team of people that are just tracking, and we have an updated resource that it's updated numerous times a day on all of these different local or state level orders, and they're changing all the time. So Eric, you mentioned the Georgia order. Those are important for you to understand when you're reopening, because there are different things that you're required to do to comply with. So that's where you want to start, is CDC guidance, and then your applicable shelter in place or return to work reopen orders.
Yeah. So we're bringing folks back to work, but I get the feeling, and I'm seeing this more and more, that we're not bringing everyone back to work. And in fact, there might be people who are working right now who we've realized, by virtue of leveraging technology and whether it's Zoom or otherwise, or just recognizing certain efficiencies of telecommuting, there are certain folks who may be working right now who may not be in the company's plans for the long run. So that brings up a couple of issues. Do you agree with me? Do you think that some of these new efficiencies are going to lead to more layoffs?
Yeah, certainly. Look, as I mentioned, the way we work, this is it's the past is the past. I don't see us ever going completely back to that. So there's more efficiencies, but also we're seeing tremendous, and we all see it out there, unemployment, challenges for businesses. Look at the service industry. I think I saw something the other day that said, that there's some projections that 1 in 4 restaurants won't survive. That's unbelievable. So people are changing not only the way they work, but the way they provide services and goods in the workplace, and the way we operate is different. So therefore, it may not be necessary to have the same amount of employees. There's more efficiencies in technology, certainly. It's like the old automation, right? When the assembly lines went to automation, it's the same kind of progression.
Yeah. So let's drop a marker here. Let's remind the folks about one of the important laws. We talked a little bit about the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Comes back into play here if you're going to have layoffs, right? So if you're terminating one employee, and that employee is under 40, and you want to get a release, consult a lawyer, but there's no incredible magic to it. There's no set formula that has to be in that severance agreement. But once we start talking about employees over 40, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, as modified by the OWBPA, comes into play. So if we're talking about one employee, you got to do a couple of things, and your lawyer will remind you this. You got to give them a release that's in plain English, right? Knowing and voluntary waiver. You have to, in that severance agreement, you have to encourage the employee to go talk to a lawyer. You have to give them up to 21 days in which to sign the document. And then after they sign, they get 7 days in which to rescind their signature. And they can't waive any claims that are in the future. I think I checked all the boxes there. So that's basically it for a single employee termination. But if you recognize that your business has gotten way more efficient and you want to reduce, let's say, headcount by 10, all right, then it gets a little bit more complicated, because now we have a termination program. And when you do that, instead of getting 21 days in which to consider the release, the employees who are over 40 get 45 days in which to consider the release. Plus, you have to attach a schedule to the back of your release, which identifies the business unit or units that have been affected by the layoff. So it could be, all associates reporting to David Mohl. Jackson Lewis in late. That's you're good to go. That's not doing that. It could be all employees in the Chattanooga, Tennessee office. It could be all widget makers that work second shift. You define the unit that's affected, right? And then you list out by job title all the people who are kept and all the people who are going. And for both, you list out the ages. Yeah. So that someone who gets a copy of the release can look back and say, I'm 44 years old. I look at this and I say, where do I slot in here? Well, there were some people older than me who were laid off, and there were some people younger than me who were laid off. And it doesn't appear, no one told me I'm being fired because of my age or laid off because of my age. I didn't think it was because of my age. And this looks like a pretty reasonable spectrum of folks. So, I don't think there's any age discrimination. But conversely, if I look at that schedule and I see that I'm the oldest person there, let's say I'm, instead of 44, I'm 64, the other folks who are being laid off are in their late 50s and early 60s, and all the people who are being kept are in their 30s and 20s, all of a sudden it starts to appear to be age discrimination, or at least, there's something, maybe I don't sign that release. So that's something you have to think about when you're doing those layoffs.
Yeah, and the idea there is so people, before they waive their rights, they can have, that they have sufficient information to know what they're waiving, that if there's an issue. But the other thing I want to also mention, Eric, is it'd be bigger than your example of 10, but if it's a larger scale, you should keep in mind the WARN Act, which requires certain notifications as well to government officials and their state and federal WARN laws if you've got a larger scale termination or closure.
Yeah, David, I'm glad you brought that up. So real quickly for the folks that aren't that familiar with the WARN Act, if you've got 100 or more employees, you're covered. And when you have a mass layoff, so we're talking about 500 or more employees, or if it's more than what is it, a third of your workforce or whatever it is at one location, the WARN Act can be invoked. If you have a plant closing at a particular location, you could have it could be triggered as well. There's a notice requirement that David talked about, and at the beginning of the pandemic, you saw a lot of larger layoffs, and ordinarily you've got to provide 60 days notice under the federal WARN Act, and some state WARN Acts might even require longer notice. And New Jersey at one point was going to require 90 days. They kicked the can on that for a little bit. It's still 60. But you have to provide notice. And if you don't provide the requisite notice, then you're responsible for back wages and other benefits that would have accrued during that 60-day notice period. Now, there's an exception to the notice rule, and that is due to unforeseen business circumstances. So what a lot of companies were saying were, look, we didn't foresee this COVID-19 coming. We can't afford to keep these people around, so we're furloughing them, we're laying them off, whatever. And we'll provide notice, but it's going to be contemporaneous notice. And we're seeing a couple lawsuits now that are testing that, and I suspect those lawsuits are going to fall flat. There's one against Hooters right now, I think down in Florida, where the employees allege that the proper notice, the 60-day notice, wasn't given. But here's the thing. As we go along with this pandemic, right, if there's a layoff, let's say a month from now, right, maybe you're starting to think about who you're going to lay off. If it's big enough to trigger WARN, I don't know that you're going to be able to get around that 60-day notice period anymore, right? A couple months ago, sure, but from now going forward, probably a lot tougher, unless and until, and hopefully this doesn't happen, come fall, winter, with the projections, we see another spike in COVID-19, maybe then those are the unforeseen business circumstances again. But as things are trending right now, you got to start to think about giving notice if it's going to be a mass layoff or a plant closure. Shifting gears. David, there was this $3 trillion bill that was passed in the House this week called the HEROES Act. I've heard from the others, largely, this isn't meant to be political, but, largely Democrat-controlled House, and Republicans and President Trump are saying it's dead on arrival when it comes to the Senate. It's not going to happen. But I think it's worth highlighting a few things that are in the HEROES Act, because the HEROES Act does purport or try to amend the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And we're not going to rehash everything that's in the FFCRA. We've done that ad nauseum. But I want to put David on the spot, and I want to go through some of these specific provisions, specific amendments to the FFCRA, and I want to get your hot take on whether you think this is something that in a compromise bill we might actually see go through, or whether it's forget about it. This is never going to happen. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Number one, we're going to change the FFCRA from covering public employers and private employers with less than 500 employees. That's the way it is currently. We're going to change that to every employer is now covered.
We're talking about in the hypothetical world where there was a compromise. I could see it being expanded. Do I think it's going to happen? No, but I could see that. When the FFCRA came out, that was one of the, among many, that we saw how much DOL guidance, right? It was like almost let me up. I've had enough for a while. But one of the things that was very mysterious is how they come at this threshold of 500. So I could see that happening. I think where I also think we could see some amendments is if this continues into the fall and kids still are unable to go back to work, to school rather, I think I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that. But I could see there being some movement on that in the world of if there were a compromise bill. That wouldn't shock me.
All right. And the rationale, folks, behind why it wasn't 500 plus in the first place, I heard this from a little birdie. 2 reasons. One is, since the government is effectively funding the paid leave, like, they don't have the money to do it. Second is, there was this general assumption that companies with over 500 employees already pretty uniformly provide really generous leave to their employees. I'll call bull on that.
Yeah. I heard it was a compromise. I mean, that was but who knows, right? I mean, that it was to get it done that they had to come up with a number.
Yeah.
But who knows?
But, you know, it is what it is. All right, ready? Here's the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of having 2 weeks paid leave for the quarantine or isolation order, or you have COVID-19 yourself, all the paid sick leave stuff, all that's going to apply for 12 weeks. So 12 weeks of paid leave for all the different forms of FFCRA covered leave. What do you think?
I think that's less likely. And the reason is the 14-day leave aligns with the CDC guidance to isolate or quarantine for 14 days. That's what the idea of the 5 reasons. Well, I guess there's 6 emergency paid sick leave reasons. One is the one that aligns with the EFMLA. The other ones are designed to keep people out of work who either have to care for somebody or may have COVID symptoms or have COVID. And that all aligns with CDC guidance. So I would be less inclined to think that would happen unless the CDC guidance somehow changes beyond the 14 days.
I'll take the next one because it's easy. So one of the proposals.
It's your show, so you can do that.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the proposals is that employees would be allowed to substitute PTO for FFCRA leave versus the way it is right now. An employer, let's say in weeks 3 through 12, can require that an employee substitute paid time off for expanded FMLA. So under the amended bill, it would be the employee's option. I could see that going through. That seems pretty mild. Here's the next one, which I'll just say has no chance, none whatsoever. And that would be that all the expanded FMLA reasons that we're talking about, including the new ones, would be in addition to the 12 weeks of FMLA that you get under the classic FMLA. So up to 24 weeks of leave, of which 12 would be paid and 12 wouldn't.
Well, and one thing to think about, Eric, is if they're going to try and get all of these hypothetical things in there, by the time it gets going, the FFCRA might be in the rearview mirror because that only goes through 12/31, and we're pushing on 6 months. So just something. I mean, another thing that you didn't bring up that would be interesting, and I could see I could see happening if this pandemic continues and we don't start seeing light at the end of the tunnel. And I don't mean opening up. I mean vaccines and kind of on the broader perspective is expanding that 12/31 deadline. If there's a need for that beyond that I would not surprise me.
That is one of the proposals going on.
Okay.
Instead of sunsetting at 12/31/20, it would sunset at 12/31/21. I agree with you. That of all of them is the easiest one to get through.
Right.
Let's see. Intermittent leave was the DOL, got involved and basically put the kibosh on intermittent leave for FFCRA reasons, unless the employer agrees to it, and the amendment would make intermittent leave required, if the employee needs it. I think that would get through too. The regular FMLA has that. It's a pain in the ass for HR. It's their single least favorite form of leave, but you can see that coming through. And finally, we've got some exceptions that the DOL read into the FFCRA for healthcare providers and emergency responders and small businesses. And all of those exceptions would be carved out. There would be no more exceptions. Basically, anyone would be eligible for the FFCRA leave. I think that could make it through as well, too. What do you think, David?
Yeah, I mean, I could see that being narrowed. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people that broadly, hey, broadly apply that exemption. And, the whole idea there was to give an opportunity in an overly strained healthcare system to not be more constrained. So there were those exceptions. As the curve levels out, which hopefully we're going to be seeing more of if it hasn't started already, there would be, less of a strain on the medical system, which would that would align with taking away that exemption.
All right. Those are basically the 8. Oh, there's one more. The one more is employers would not be allowed to request certifications for 5 weeks after someone starts taking the covered leave. That seems like a pretty long time.
It does. And I mean, what you can request presently is so narrow, right? I mean, it's even more narrow than the FMLA. But yeah, I think, it's already so ripe for abuse that I just think that would even be more problem, especially with people that have a generalized fear of returning to work. I mean, now I think you're going to see, and employers are starting to see it, is, hey, I was able to work remotely before, but now my son's school or summer camp is closed and I can't work remotely anymore. But it's trying to buy time for that fear of returning to work.
Yeah. I'm going to guess we're going to get some questions on that in the last 15 or so minutes of this Zoom chat. But let me address a question I saw in the chat window about WARN. And I'm going to, as soon as I finish addressing this question, I'm going to post a link to a WARN pamphlet that the Department of Labor has put out to help guide employers. So someone asked about the circumstances that trigger the WARN Act. And let me go through the 4 of them. First is when a facility is closed or discontinued, and there's an operating unit that is permanently gone that affects at least 50 employees, not counting part-time workers. We're talking a single site. The second one is when an employer lays off 500 or more workers, not counting part-timers, at a single site of employment during a 30-day period, or lays off between 50 and 499 workers when they constitute a third or more of the employer's total active workforce. Again, I'm going to post a link to this so you can read it for yourself. When an employer announces a temporary layoff of less than 6 months that meets either of the 2 criteria above, and then later on decides to extend the layoff for more than 6 months. So if you're shorter than 6 months and you bring everyone back, like on a furlough, you're good to go. But if circumstances change and you don't end up bringing the folks back, you're screwed. You're screwed in terms of WARN if you didn't give the notice. So that's the risk that you have if you don't provide the notice up front. Or the last one is if you reduce the hours of work for 50 or more workers by 50% or more for each month in any 6-month period. So I'm going to take a second here, reduce this window, and I'm going to put the link up for everyone to go check out this fancy dancy WARN pamphlet, and that should answer all your questions on WARN. But we have other questions that we got, some in advance, some live. I'm going to ask David a few of the questions and they weigh in. First question, how do I know? We'll start off with like the toughest one of all. How do I determine if an employee has contracted the coronavirus at work?
If you could figure that out, again, call me because we could retire shortly.
That's right.
Thereafter. There's no way to know that. I mean, there's no way to know where someone contracts it, or actually who in your workplace has it. I mean, so many people don't have symptoms, but there's no way to know where it was contracted with 100%.
Here's the only way. You ever go to one of those Chuck E. Cheese's when you were young, and at the end, like you go into the ticket machine and they turn the air on, the tickets start flying all over, and you're grabbing tickets really quickly. Or sometimes you see it at sporting events, they're grabbing dollars and you're trying to stuff them down your pants. and when 30 seconds is over, the wind dies down and you count up all your money and see what you have, all your tickets. If we could throw someone in the coronavirus machine at work, like that's the only way we could possibly. And I know that's a terrible analogy, but it's, to David's point, it's so difficult. It's so difficult.
And
go ahead.
Yeah. And one other point on that I hear a lot about is, okay, we have somebody that his wife, he believes he had coronavirus. His wife just got tested and she came back positive. He's now gotten tested. He's waiting for the results. He feels fine. Wife's in a different room. Can he come back to work if we make him get a test? And I say, well, remember, a test is kind of like the analogy of the ADA interactive process. It's a snapshot in time. So let's assume, for purpose of the hypothetical, that the guy, goes and gets a test on his way home from work, sits and waits for the test results, and it's negative, and then goes home and comes back to work the next day. That test result is only as good as the time he got the test. He could go home and be infected. So keep that. I mean, people think, oh, well, I'm going to have to, everybody's going to get tested and we're going to do it a week from Wednesday. That's okay for a week from Wednesday. But when it comes to a week from Thursday, unless everybody's living in a bubble, right. So that's something I've been having quite a few conversations about.
Moops. I said that last week and then going back to the well.
There you go.
Next question. If an employee does not want to return to the office, even though safety measures are in place, what steps should we take? That's a good question. I mean, we're getting that a lot. You've got the PPE, you've got the mask, you've got the hand sanitizer, you've communicated till you're blue in the face that we're taking every possible reasonable safety measure. But you've got someone who says, I don't want to return.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing that I recommend is ask them why. So like, hey, I want to come to work. Ask them why not. Ideally, if you can get it in writing in an email, some sort of documentation, then your course of action depends on what they say. If they say, hey, look, you know what? I'm not going out in this. I got kids at home. I'm not bringing COVID home. That's generalized fear. And that would be, look, we are open for business. We're allowed to be open for business, and we need you to come to work. And we need you to come to work on, Tuesday. And if you're not going to be at work on Tuesday, we're going to assume that you've resigned. Now, what if they say, look, I have anxiety and it's off the charts with COVID? That's an ADA issue. And potentially it could get into the FMLA. Less likely, but it could if someone's like, look, my husband has a pretty severe health condition and he can't leave the house and I need to take care of him. Then you want to start your FMLA process. But generalized fear, absent some legally protected, some legal entitlement to leave, they can be required to come to work.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I'm a little more bullish on, not that you're bearish, but I joke that FMLA paperwork, I'm advising folks to give it out like it's candy. If someone says anxious, boom, there you go. Notice of rights, medical certification, go get it filled out, bring it back. We'll give you the FMLA leave if you're eligible. Sure. Other than that, right. I mean, generalized anxiety, there's a difference between that and someone who's got PTSD or someone who's got diagnosed panic disorders. They're under treatment, stuff like that.
Yep.
You're allowed to ask, even in the ADA context. You're allowed to ask for medical backup. I mean, I don't think that should be the focus of your discussion. I think that the focus really should be on accommodating, but you are allowed to ask.
And that's what I mean when I say trigger your process. It's your documentation process. So you're not just taking their word for it.
Yeah. Someone just asked, well, what if they are out of FMLA? No, that's terrible. If they're out of FMLA, well, there could be some FFCRA available. A couple, 2 weeks right there. Could be some just regular old paid time off available. A leave of absence, if it's an ADA disability situation, might be reasonable. Could be talking about telecommuting still, or a transfer to a position that makes them feel more comfortable coming to work. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, there reaches a point where if they've got nothing left and they can't come to work, that's it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. Um, we had a bunch of other questions that were submitted in advance. I'm scrolling up to the questions that are being asked today. Let's see. Oh, here's a question. Asking for my neighbor. If they have an employee who has been on EFML, but their daycare is now back open and they can work from home but won't respond to employer communications, can the EFML pay be stopped? Yeah, I suppose so. But you'd want to be really darn sure that the employee isn't taking care of the kids anymore, that all the underlying assumptions or facts are as they are. Remember, at the end of the day, yeah, it would be nice to have your workers back in the workplace working, but you're not going to have to pay for this EFML. I mean, you're paying it up, you're fronting the money, but you're getting the money back in the tax credit. So it's not really costing you. So I wouldn't be too vigilant about that. But yeah, I mean, just because an employee takes off, I mean, you can require them to follow your call-out rules. That's what the law says. So if someone isn't reporting back to you, yeah, I mean, technically you.
Yeah, and employees still have to communicate with their employer. I mean, that just because they're on leave doesn't mean they can just be non-responsive. Make sure you document your attempts. Don't just lob out calls. You know, when it gets to the end of the line, send them a letter so you have documentation.
Here's a question. Have major corporations determined their liability for workers testing positive after they return to work? And then this follow-up question is, will workers' compensation protect employers from lawsuits as the exclusive remedy? I'm going to bust out our first "it depends," but then I'm going to turn it over to David and see what you have to say.
See if I validate your answer.
Yeah. Yeah. In all seriousness, I mean, workers' comp, the rules vary from state to state.
Yeah.
And the general rule, and I'm not a workers' comp lawyer. I know just enough to call someone else who is a workers' comp lawyer, but basically I know and I've divined during this pandemic that workers' comp is your exclusive remedy when you have a work-related injury, or, you know, in this case, a COVID-19 pandemic. Some states like California, for example, have issued executive orders that there's a presumption, a rebuttable presumption, but a presumption nonetheless, that if you contract COVID-19, that you got it from the workplace. So then workers' comp would kick in. I saw recently, though, a lawsuit that was filed. I think John Hyman wrote about it on his blog, Ohio Employer Law Blog.com, that it was a case involving a lawsuit in, I want to say Utah, by an employee who claims that the employer did not take reasonable precautions and consequently they got sick. So it amounted to gross negligence and therefore goes beyond the scope of the workers' comp bar. And therefore they're going to go after the employer directly for damages. The other thing that the workers' comp bar doesn't protect you against is what happens if a customer comes in and gets sick, right? That's what we're seeing with some of the big box stores. I won't call out names. I think of one in particular where there's a lawsuit. So if not for your employees, they're your number one resource. I mean, keep it safe for your customers too, because they're not going to be affected by workers' comp. They get sick or something bad happens, they're going to sue you.
And it goes back to what we said at the beginning. Like, the core of all this is the safety protocols, and just follow the CDC and your local, if you have applicable, reopening orders, and it's cleaning and disinfecting the work site. Obviously, it's not, you don't want to be that employer where you're going to run into problems if you know someone's positive and say, I'm going to continue letting them work and not say anything, and then you got an outbreak. That's not a good fact for you.
Yeah. comment from someone who says, as a public employer, we get no tax credits. Oh, where's the sad trombone? Wah, 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 wah. Sorry about that. Here's a question. Is a religious entity bound by the same standard and guidelines with members, for example, temperature checks? I'm not aware of any exceptions for religious entities or return to work. There may be some exceptions for religious entities with respect to unemployment. So, and that's going to vary by state. In states, religious entities don't participate in unemployment. I learned this more and more. All of a sudden, all of us are becoming unemployment comp experts in the last month or two. But however, the CARES Act and the PUA have created new avenues for folks that work for clergy and for other like independent contractors, gig workers to collect unemployment compensation. So, check on a state-to-state basis the answer to that question. Someone made a comment, David, I'm documenting everything. Never know when FFCRA doesn't go that far. I'm documenting everything. Never know when regs and guidance will change. Yeah, I think documentation is your friend, generally speaking.
Well, one thing also when you touched on religion, and it's just a slight pivot, but when you're talking about PPE or things like face coverings and things like that, those are you do need to keep religion and disability in mind. If someone's like, hey, look, my religion, what you're asking me to put on or wear is inconsistent with, maybe there's certain, things that people attire related to religion or disabilities. Look, especially when we talk about certain kinds of testing on the horizon, like, look, I can't get blood. I mean, I'm a blood thinner, that kind of thing. I mean, so the important kind of one key takeaway here is think about this broadly. There's tons and tons. I mean, it's almost the perfect storm because this is kind of like the Wild West, right? We're dealing with something that changes in COVID all the time. It's new. We're learning about it. There's laws in place that are still kind of being navigated and interpreted, but there needs to be guardrails. I mean, too many times I'm talking with clients and they're not thinking about, what the restrictions are because it's like the COVID panic. I just have to keep it out. I'm going to make everybody take a test, give me their test and give me their wife's test too. Like you've got to be sure that you're being smart and working within the parameters of the law.
Yeah. Well, we are fast approaching the 1 o'clock hour. David, I want to give you a chance to, first I want to thank you and I want to thank everyone who attended. David, before we go, do you have anything you want to plug? You want to, any shout outs?
Well, thanks for having me. Always good to be able to talk about this stuff together. We go way back. I want to mention, our blog, disabilityleavelaw.com. Certainly, I'd be happy to chat with anybody if I can be of assistance. David.Mohl@jacksonlewis.com. You can go to our website. We have a whole, just a really robust website on jacksonlewis.com dedicated to COVID updates, resources, all that. So, if you're looking for some help there, check that out as well. But more importantly, thanks for having me, Eric. Always great to connect. And, maybe someday down the road when our thing in Philly gets rescheduled, I'll see you live and in person.
Yeah, we'll put it out there. I will remind folks down the line. What is it, in June, July? When are we doing this?
It's June. I believe we're in June. It's virtual, I think now. I think it's in June.
So David and I are going to be presenting on, basically, we'll call it an FMLA 101. We'll be doing that for the Pennsylvania Bar Institute, and I'll post some links as we get closer to it on the blog. If people want to attend, the fee associated with that, but you'll get some continuing legal education credits if you're a lawyer, and if you're an HR professional, well, we'll just be.
And maybe Eric will wear his mask. So
I don't think anyone's going to see my face for that one. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It's 1 o'clock. Thanks so much for attending. This has been recorded. Let's see. Did I remember to click the record button? I did. Sweet. This will be posted on the YouTube channel. Thanks so much for attending. we're coming back. The plan is to come back next week on Friday, and I've got a good guest. I've got a good guest I think lined up. Another good one. We've had a good run of guests, and next week will be no different. I will be revealing who that is early next week. So as we are oft doing now in these pandemic times, everyone stay safe, stay healthy. That is the standard standard closing wish. And it's not quite the weekend, but we're almost at Memorial Day weekend. So have a nice extended weekend. All right. Bye, everyone.
All right. Be well.